We'll be looking at basic HTML tags. Now this is a multi-video series, which means that there's several lessons encompassing all of HTML. So if you've not watched lesson 1, I highly recommend you do so before watching this video so you have a context and understanding of what is going on. With that being said, let's go ahead and look into what HTML tags are. But before we do, there's a couple things that we need to specify and look at. And the first thing we need to look at is what is an element. So essentially HTML is all composed of elements. A paragraph, an image would be considered an element. And then elements break down into their subtypes such as attributes, tags, and content. And we'll look over and examine these three aspects. So the first aspect that we're going to look at is tags, which is what the primary focus of this video. Now a tag is essentially a descriptive term that tells the web browser what element to interpret. And breaking that down more simply, all tags that you will be looking at are the structural components that makes up the HTML backbone, that makes up the visual elements and the overall organization and structure you see that your web browser interprets and outputs on your computer screen. So every tag has two specific components that are imperative when writing HTML, and that is a start tag and an end tag. A start tag is the beginning of each element, kind of self-explanatory. So for example, a paragraph would start with bracket P close bracket. And then the end tag would just be like the same with the beginning tag, same syntax, same writing, except an end tag ends after the close bracket, backslash P, then close bracket again. With that being said, that is very definitive, and something that needs to be known is that start tag does not have the backslash, but an end tag does. And we'll go over more tags so we can see this implemented. Now another thing to understand in a subtype of elements are attributes. An attribute is essentially a modification of a basic element. It's kind of like a descriptor, kind of like an adjective. For example, you can specify width or the height of an image or color or something of that nature. That is all classified under the attribute element. We'll get into that much later. And then content is pretty self-explanatory. It's pretty much anything that goes between the start tag and end tag. That would include paragraphs, images, line breaks, spacing, font, everything. So that's not too big to understand. But now when looking at the web page structure, there's a couple things to understand. The four essential parts to the HTML structure. And the first that you'll see if you ever open up an HTML text editor or a template for HTML is you see this bracket exclamation mark doc type HTML. Now that's not something to really be scared about or always remember. Essentially all it is the basis of just telling the web browser that it is interpreting HTML and goes from there. That's pretty much the function of that. After doc type you have bracket HTML, and then you have head, body, and then HTML again. And we'll look at all these breakdowns as well. But something to note is look at the structure of HTML at the very beginning right here. Where you have HTML, at the very bottom you have HTML that closes everything encompassing inside of this. Inside the body is where you have the content, inside the head is where you have the title. I'll get all into this. So with that being said, let's break it down. So as I just said, the body is all the code for everything that's visible on the web page. Everything that you make, the paragraphs, the images, the fonts, the headings, everything you insert goes inside the body tags. Inside the head tag contains information, like I said, the page title. And you break down the head into a title tag, such as where you see this example right here, where essentially where this says this is the page title. On your web browser, when you have multiple tabs open and you can view the little writing inside the tab, that's what this is. That's the function of that. So let's go and look at paragraph tags. So paragraph elements are what is used to place text onto a web page. And as I showed at the very beginning, you put text between the two tags, bracket P and backslash bracket P. So for example, this statement right here, this is where your content goes, would just, if you were to open and load this into HTML, it would just be a blank document, like a blank web page, and just have one sentence that says this is where your content goes. The tags that you see on either side, the bracket P's, are not going to be visually displayed on the web browser. It's something to note. That's just part of the coding. So after paragraphs, you also have line breaks. So essentially there's automatic spacing that takes place with paragraphs, but say you need additional spacing, you would use a line break, and the tag for that is bracket BR or capital bracket BR. It doesn't really matter. But essentially you can see the pattern forming that HTML is more self-explanatory than other coding languages or other syntaxes because it kind of makes sense. P for paragraph, B for break, H for heading, stuff like that. It's kind of more straightforward than the typical example that you would see. Also, so for example, when you have a paragraph, this is the first paragraph, then you want to put in a break that would add a couple lines down, and then another statement would show up on that blank sheet. And I'll go over, we'll actually start writing syntax in the next video. So after you have paragraphs as well as spacing, then you have headings. And headings are actually kind of important. Paragraphs have the statements and the lines where you write down everything, but headings are able to substantiate specific titles or emphasis or things of that nature. So they create different sizes that make the text bolded. So think of a newspaper where you would have the front headline that says Pueblo programming is on the rise. And then below that you would have a smaller subheading that talks about Pueblo programming is on YouTube or something of that nature. That's essentially how you treat this. And headings range from H1 to the largest to H6 to being tiny. So H1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. That's how you would write that syntax. So an example of headers in action, as I just talked about. So when you have this first tag here, H1, increase in public programmers, you'll see that you have to close it. And then you have a paragraph tag here due to the blah, blah, blah. And then you close it. And then we have a smaller heading underneath that that says sample work of programmers. And then we have another paragraph, another statement. So essentially you would have this big title in bold, thick letters, and then you would have a little line underneath it, a little sentence, and then you would have a smaller heading still bolded, and then you have another sentence underneath that. So you can start to see and picture how really the HTML coding works. But something to be and understand is that you can see the opening tag versus a closing tag. Everything needs that. So another essential part, another element that you need to understand is fonts. And fonts are essentially the physical shape and appearance of letters. So web browsers come, of course, with default fonts that is specific to whatever they're set with. But of course, you can customize and change their own fonts to display visually on your web page. And a couple other things to understand is you can format that font. Say you want it to be bolded text or italicized, you use bracket B or bracket I. So essentially what that would look like is, say you have the statement here, this is normal print, and then you have it bolded here, this is bold print, and then you close it and then italicized. So this would just be one sentence with normal, and then the text would be bolded, and then the text would be italicized. So pretty straightforward. We'll get into more of this. We'll actually show it to you. So another thing to understand is that fonts can also set the type of appearance. Say you want to use Times New Roman or Arial or whatever it may be. You use the font element to set the face. That's the technical term, is the appearance of the text. So for example, here we have a paragraph statement, but we also have it customized for font with this font tag, and we want to set the face, the type of text, from Arial or Helvetica, sans serif, and size 5. What that would look like on an actual blank HTML document is you have the blank space and this one sentence that has the word Arial in the Arial text, Helvetica in the Helvetica font, and sans serif in the sans serif font, size 5. And then if you want to customize it even more, which we'll get more into later, so for example, here we have the color blue. This is a blue colored Helvetica in size 5 font. So essentially that's I'll show you how this is implemented on an actual editor. But there you can see that a font face essentially sets the appearance of the text, and you can change it to whatever you would like. So another thing to understand when you have paragraphs and line breaks is overall just understanding lines as they are. Now lines in HTML are known as horizontal rules, and you're going to want to know this. And the element for that is the tag bracket HR. So horizontal rules or lines essentially separate the sections of a page from something else. And this is kind of like a line break essentially, where a line break you can customize it a little more, or you could rather use a horizontal rule and you can set the width to have a bigger pixel so it kind of separates the lines more or makes the lines bigger or thicker or something of that nature. If you actually want to add lines inside of a web page, this is the tag that you would use. So for example, that's the syntax. You have bracket HR and you set the width to either pixels or to percent or whatever it may be. And then there's also like 400 pixels. That's how you would write that out. Or say you want to set the actual size or the thickness of that line, then you would write HR size equals 6, and you could just customize that and change it to what you want. Now, by default, lines are what is called shaded, so they're actually kind of transparent. To make it a solid line, you would write inside of that syntax, inside of that tag, under HR, horizontal rules, no shade, one word. And then there's some more examples here below that you can see. So I hope that wasn't too perplexing. Those are just some of the basic elements and the tags that you can see that are used a lot inside of HTML structuring and coding. So the next lesson, I guarantee, will be more exciting. We're going to be reviewing editors, looking at different HTML editors, text editors, things of that nature, actually writing out the code, evaluating the syntax, how to set it all up, and structural to HTML coding. And we're also going to play with creating links, looking at inserting images as well as color, and then showing you the code, and then showing you what it would look like on a web page. So exciting stuff to come. Stay tuned.